Hello, it's ShadeX, and I figured I'd give my 2 cents on the two Amazing Spider-Man movies.
2 cents? We're talking about 2 cents.
These films were Sony's first attempt to reboot the Spider-Man movie franchise. Speaking of reboots, yeah, I'm gonna look like this from now on. Simp! But before I start talking about the Tassum films, we have to go to the beginning for a bit. The original Spider-Man trilogy was directed by Sam Raimi. These films starred Tobey Maguire as the iconic web slinger, and this trilogy got me interested in superhero-related media. The first two are classic, and the third, while suffering from a lot of studio meddling, like the forced inclusion of Venom, was still an enjoyable film despite all that. There were plans for a fourth film in the series that would have been released on May 6, 2011. Sam Raimi planned to end the series on a high note with a fourth film. The film would have focused on Peter getting evicted, and Mysterio would have appeared in the film, played by Bruce Campbell. The Vulture was going to play a huge role in it as the main villain. However, after reading multiple script revisions by different writers that he was not happy with, Raimi decided to exit the project. Spider-Man 4 got cancelled on January of 2010. Now, at the time of uploading, it has been 11 years since this film has been cancelled. So what happened next? Reboot! In 2012, The Amazing Spider-Man came out. This film was directed by Marc Webb and starred Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. In 2014, a sequel came out titled The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The two Webb Spider-Man films are very interesting because they are sandwiched in between the Raimi trilogy and the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies directed by John Watts. The Amazing films were made at the time in competition with Disney and Fox's Marvel films. Now all Marvel films are made by Disney essentially. While Sony does still own the film rights to Spider-Man, mainline films featuring the character are a part of the MCU as the company is working in cooperation with Disney now. Sure, there are a few surprises like Into the Spider-Verse, an animated Marvel film, which Disney would never make. There's also Venom, which wasn't made with Disney involved. But as far as all the major Marvel characters' film rights are concerned, Disney now has all of them back. 2012 and 2014 were a very different time. Back then, there were 3 studios making very tonally different films with Marvel characters. The fact that other studios had the major characters even encouraged Disney to adapt deep cuts like Guardians of the Galaxy into feature films. Spider-Man was a big cash cow for Sony. At the time, Sony had no interest in cooperating with Disney and wanted to make Spidey films of their own. The first Amazing film was made before the cinematic universe craze really took off. The second Amazing film, on the other hand, was made to set up a cinematic universe. I was suggested by my friend Manuel D, who did a Spider-Man movies video of his own, to revisit these two movies because he wanted to hear my opinion, so I figured I'd take a look at both films and break down what works and what doesn't.
Poor Peter Parker. No mother. No father. No uncle. All alone.
The Amazing Spider-Man is different from the Raimi films. I know it'd be really easy to compare Tassum 1 to the 2002 Spider-Man movie, but they are two wildly different films. I want to be fair to this film and even Tassum 2, as they are their own films despite having the same title character. Because of this, I will judge these films on their own merit rather than compare them to the Raimi trilogy, especially since the story of the Amazing Spider-Man universe is not complete. Despite being another origin story, Tassum tries to not retread old ground, aside from Uncle Ben dying a second time. The first Tassum film does some interesting things. There's a new love interest in the form of Gwen Stacy, who Peter dated before Mary Jane in the comics. There's a new villain in the form of the Lizard. Another detail that is interesting is that Peter's in high school for this whole film. The biggest thing this film does is put a lot of emphasis on Peter Parker's parents. This was something that had never been done before in a Spider-Man film. Rather than do a summary of the film, I think it'd be easier to take a look at each old and new edition individually. As far as old editions go, this is yet another origin story. At the start, Peter Parker isn't Spider-Man. He gets bullied by Flash for a bit, he gets bitten by a radioactive spider. The film follows these beats, but it does them very differently. The film has Peter, but a slightly different characterization of him. At first, I wasn't the biggest fan of Andrew Garfield's version of Peter Parker. To be honest, I still prefer Tobey Maguire more. However, now my opinion on that has changed. Rather than be a traditional nerd, he is a skateboarder as well. Despite all that, though, he has shown to be very skilled in science, just like in the comics.
So anyway, I'm GirlyWolfPup, and I'm invading Shade's video here to discuss Tassim and its version of Peter Parker. I feel a lot of the dislike towards Tassim's Peter comes from a place of closed-mindedness, because a lot of people have this narrow view of what a nerdy character is. Peter is still a science genius who has a hard time in school. It doesn't matter that he's a skateboarder or that he starts out as kind of a dick. And I even think it helps with his character. Peter's growth throughout the film feels natural throughout it because he learns from the events of the film. He doesn't even call himself Spider-Man until he earns it. Captain Stacy calls Spidey out directly to Peter during the dinner scene, and right after the bridge scene happens where Spidey saves the kid, which visually shows the audience that Peter took what Captain Stacy said to heart and goes for the more selfless option for once. Like I said earlier, this scene is the first time he calls himself Spider-Man, and it feels earned because of how this film went about getting to this point writing-wise. Tassim created a version of Peter who starts out selfish only to develop into the hero we love after being told directly his actions make him no better than the criminals in the city, which I feel creates an engaging protagonist for the story Webb was trying to tell in the movie. I really do think more people would see things from this perspective if they looked at the movie with an open mind. And this is not to say Raimi Peter wasn't more accurate to the source material, because he was. But Webb's Peter, I feel, is different while still keeping the soul of Spider-Man as a character. But anyway, I'll turn things back to Shade now.
GirlyWolfPup brings up a lot of good points in her segment. Despite being a different Peter Parker and not being completely comic accurate, the one from The Amazing Spider-Man isn't bad by any means. Andrew Garfield is a great actor and he plays the role quite well with the material he is given. Back to the topic of the origin story aspect. Peter does go to Oscorp in the film, but not on a school trip. In this film, he actually goes out of his way to go there by posing as an intern to find his father, Richard's old colleague, Dr. Kurt Connors. He eventually ends up in a contraption full of spiders, and after leaving, one sticks to the back of his neck and bites him. He then realizes he has powers after inadvertently starting a fight at a subway. I really find it funny how Peter is depicted post-spider bite in this film. He gets an intense hunger for food, he also gets super strong, he demolishes an alarm clock, shares the glass off of a basketball hoop, and ends up destroying a glass door. This version of Spider-Man is incredibly strong, but with great power comes great responsibility. Now I'll talk about this film's incarnation of Uncle Ben, who is played by Martin Sheen. He plays an important role in this film, as he is the reason Peter becomes Spider-Man. Doesn't necessarily say with great power comes responsibility verbatim in this film, but he says something very similar.
But your father lived by a philosophy, a principle really. He believed that if you could do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do those things. That's what's at stake here. Not choice, responsibility.
One thing I found very interesting is how the phrase is tied to Peter's dad in this film, who I'll talk about later. Uncle Ben is okay in this film. He cares for his nephew's well-being. Gets mad at him for not picking up Aunt May when he ignored his call when he was hanging out with Kurt Connors. He knows that Peter has a crush on Gwen, who he saw on his nephew's computer. Speaking of Uncle Ben, now I have to address the elephant in the room. His death. Uncle Ben dies because of odd circumstances in this film. Peter tries to buy chocolate milk at a convenience store, but he doesn't have 2 cents to buy it. The clerk is just a massive jerk to Peter, and then a guy robs some beer and money from the cash register. He tosses the chocolate milk to Peter, he lets the criminal get away. The criminal then shoots Uncle Ben. I really was anticipating seeing this scene again when I decided to review this film because it baffled me when I first saw it. Uncle Ben dying over chocolate milk is very absurd. The stakes were way higher in the Raimi movie where Peter let the criminal get away after being paid badly by the wrestling promoter. Looking at this from a different point of view, I can kinda understand it. I mean, like T-Bone in this film, there are quite a few angry convenience store owners out there. That's really clear.
You cannot use the double gulp cup for the fucking Slurpee. This right here. This is Slurpee cup.
This scene is very odd, but I think it works alright in this film. Uncle Ben does still die because of Peter's lack of responsibility because he let a criminal get away. The story beats of his origin are still followed, but in all honesty, I really can't completely defend the chocolate milk scene. It's just really goofy. Chills run down my spine whenever I rewatch the first Raimi film, where Peter lets the criminal get away.
He stole the game! Stop that guy! Stop him! He's got my money!
Thanks.
Could have taken that guy apart. Now he's gonna get away with my money.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
However, the Amazing Spider-Man version of these events, with the convenience store robbery, is just so bad it's good.
You're gonna pay? You're holding up my line.
I don't have 2 cents.
You can't afford your milk. Just step aside. But Daddy didn't give you enough milk money today?
It's 2 cents. We're talking about 2 cents.
Just step aside, kid.
Hey! Stop! Somebody stop that guy! Hey, kid, little help?
Not my policy.
Hey, stop! Somebody stop that dude!
I do understand that Sony didn't want to rehash the wrestling scene that was in the comics, since it was already adapted in the first Raimi Spider-Man movie. I definitely understand why this film tried to do something different, but they could have done something better than this. There's another thing that happens in this film. Peter gets angry and has a desire for revenge. After being told that Ben's killer has a star tattoo on his left arm, he searches for him. He stops a robbery and gets into a fight with someone who looks like the killer, who he nearly kills until he realizes he got the wrong guy. He falls through the ceiling and sees a Mexican wrestling ring. He sees a luchador mask, which inspires him to make one of his own. While this film opts to not use the wrestling scene from the comics, I am at least glad there was a nod of sorts to it. Peter continues his search for Ben's killer. He also ends up making his own web shooters. He doesn't make his own webbing though, and instead uses some made by Oscorp. First, Peter makes a vigilante suit, but eventually he makes his own traditional Spider-Man suit that we all know and love. It is very clear that TASM 1 is a totally different film from Spider-Man 2002. TASM 1 isn't trying to copy the prior films by any means. All the story beats that are reimagined are a part of Spider-Man's comic origin story. Rather than be a carbon copy of the comics, however, this film opts to do its own thing. For example, Peter being a violent vigilante in this film, at first may feel out of character for comic book Spider-Man. However, this isn't Spider-Man from the comics. This isn't Raimi's Spider-Man. This is a new take on Spider-Man. Sure, this film is an origin story, but it goes out of its way to differentiate itself from the previous film adaptation. Now, with all that being said, it's time to go over the new things that this film added. Peter's parents are the strangest addition to this film. They didn't play a huge role in any other Spider-Man adaptation prior to this. They are very important to the story of this film. In the film's opening, Peter searches for his father. He enters his home office, but Richard runs out in a hurry. We see a chalkboard with drawings of spiders. There's also a spider model on Richard's desk. The intro is very mysterious. Peter's mother and father leave him at Uncle Ben's and Aunt May's home. The film puts a lot of importance on Peter's father. He clearly has ties to Oscorp as he was associated with Curt Connors. The focus of this first film is about Peter trying to learn more about his dad, who left him at a young age. The parents subplot isn't too annoying here, and it works in this film. However, the parents subplot is something that really bogs down the second film, which I'll have a fun time talking about later. The film introduces a new love interest in the form of Gwen Stacy. Sure, she appeared in Spider-Man 3, but that version was more of a side character and was not the main love interest. Emma Stone does a great job playing Gwen, who Peter actually dated before Mary Jane. Peter and her have really great chemistry in this film together. In this adaptation, Gwen is depicted as very intelligent. She clearly cares about science as she's an intern at Oscorp. Her father is Captain George Stacy, a police captain who is critical of Peter's vigilante actions as Spider-Man. He is played by Dennis Leary, an actor I am aware of because my parents watched him in a show called Rescue Me. Captain Stacy is a great character in this film as he points out to Peter why his actions as Spider-Man are wrong. This is shown very well through the dinner scene which GirlyWolfPup mentioned earlier in her segment. After revealing his identity to Gwen, Peter does his first heroic feat where he officially becomes Spider-Man once the lizard starts wreaking havoc. He ends up saving a kid named Jack from a car that nearly falls off a bridge. This scene is great. In it, Peter removes his mask to show the kid he is not anyone he should be afraid of. He gives the mask to the kid because he says it will make him strong. After saving Jack, Peter accepts his identity as Spider-Man. This scene right here is fantastic and is one of my favorite moments in Spider-Man media. While the Amazing films aren't my personal favorite Spider-Man films, I still can admit they have a lot of heart to them. This is a great example of that. I really like the role Dr. Connors plays in this film. At the start, Peter seeks him out because of his father's ties to him. Rewatching this film now, I realized that I missed a major plot detail. That detail being, Dr. Connors is given the task of creating a serum that can prevent Norman Osborn from dying. This leads to him creating a regeneration serum using lizard DNA. I really love the scenes of Peter and Dr. Connors working together at the start of the film. The film is an origin story for both of them. The regeneration serum seems to be working after it makes a mouse regrow its legs, and Dr. Connors is happy about this. However, a higher up in Oscorp tells him that the serum is no longer his and that he is fired. Out of rage, Dr. Connors takes the serum, regrows his arm, but becomes a lizard in the process. Peter, after seeing a headline in the Daily Bugle asking for evidence of the lizard, goes to the sewer. He fights him for a bit and escapes after he gets scratched by his claws. However, Peter leaves behind a camera that says, "Property of Peter Parker," which leads to the lizard discovering his secret identity. Seriously, I don't get it. Why would you put your name on your camera, especially if you're a superhero? I really don't get that. That's pretty stupid. Following that up, we get a cool fight scene at the school. The highlight of this sequence is the library scene, which features a great Stan Lee cameo. Stan is listening to classical music on his headphone and is paying no attention to the action behind him. I really miss that guy. The lizard is an okay antagonist in this film, but I really wish the film showed his family in it. He clearly is at least married as he wears a ring. The original story of the lizard is a tragedy in a way. Dr. Connors is a family man who becomes a monster after trying to regain his arm. It would have been neat to see Dr. Connors' wife and kids react to his reptile transformation in horror like they did in the comics. That was definitely a missed opportunity. Also, according to my friend Manuel, there was a deleted scene where Dr. Connors takes his kid to school, but that it was cut for unknown reasons. I really like his design in the film though. He has a good creepy CGI design. Still, his motives in the film could have been better. He starts off by going after the guy who was going to fire him, and after that he decides to just turn the city of New York into lizards for some reason. While not a perfect antagonist, the lizard is alright. I love the build up to Dr. Connors becoming the lizard along with Peter becoming Spider-Man. Another thing I want to mention is the reveal of the mouse lizard. That moment was pretty goofy. Back to the topic of Captain Stacy, he's my new favorite character in this film. At first he is against what Spider-Man is doing and initially wants Spider-Man arrested. I really like the scene where Peter visits him to warn him about the lizard, and he goes on about how he is talking nonsense that he should go to Tokyo.
He's transformed himself into a giant lizard.
Let me ask you a question. Do I look like the mayor of Tokyo?
The police catch Spider-Man and Captain Stacy unmasks him. However, Spider-Man is able to shoot webs at their faces to prevent them from seeing him. However, Captain Stacy realizes he is Peter. Spider-Man reveals to Captain Stacy that Gwen is in Oscorp. He lets the wall crawler go. There is a scene where Gwen attempts to make an antidote for the lizard. He shows up while it's being made, and you'd expect her to be scared, but she is able to defend herself via the use of a flamethrower. Following that up, there is a great moment where the dad of the boy Spider-Man saved calls the construction workers of New York City to help him swing to Oscorp Tower. This swing scene is great as it shows the city banding together to help Spidey save the day. It seems Spider-Man is caught and the lizard unmasks him and taunts him. Tells Peter that he is all alone because his mother, father, and uncle are dead. Captain Stacy shows up and says that Peter isn't alone. This is a very powerful scene. I really love seeing Spider-Man and Captain Stacy team up. They had a good dynamic by the end of the film. It reminded me a lot of Batman and Commissioner Gordon's. Anyway, the lizard scratches him while Spider-Man crawls on top of the tower to replace the lizard formula with the antidote. He ends up putting the blue antidote into the machine and Dr. Connors gets cured. He apologizes to Peter and then mentions that the captain is in serious danger. Peter rushes to his aid, however it is too late. Captain Stacy tells Peter he'll be a great hero and then gives him his mask. He asks him to promise not to see Gwen anymore, and then he dies. The film ends with Dr. Connors getting arrested and Captain Stacy's funeral happening. Gwen visits Peter and he tells her that he can't see her anymore. She realizes he promised her father he'd stay away from her. However, Aunt May encourages Peter to continue the relationship with Gwen, unaware of the promise. The movie ends with Peter seeing Flash at Midtown High, who is now wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt. He mentions that girls like the hero. Peter goes to class and he's late. He promises to the teacher that he won't be late again. She tells Peter not to make promises he can't keep. He then whispers to Gwen, "But those are the best kind." Following that, Spidey swings through New York, and then the movie ends. Oh, wait a second, there's an end credit scene with Kirk Connors in jail, and a mysterious bad guy asks him if he told Peter the truth about his father. Oh boy, more parent stuff. This can't be possibly bad at all. Overall, The Amazing Spider-Man, while flawed, is a competent film. It has a beginning, middle, and end. I really like how this film was able to retell the origin story the 2002 film did, while putting its own spin on things. After that movie, I was looking forward to the next film. I really liked Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, and while I did still prefer the Raimi film, I was looking forward to whatever story happened next.
You're a lot like your father.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
Now it's time to cover The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
It's my birthday. Now it's time to light the candles.
Oh no! Despite the first film being more competent, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 interests me a lot more because of how much of a train wreck it is. You'd think that this sequel would build up on the foundation that the first set up, but instead this film is filled with setups for future spin-offs. The beginning of this film is very odd. It features Richard and Mary Parker on a plane. I don't know what Sony was thinking, to be honest, with the plane scene at the beginning. I honestly don't care for Peter's parents that much. I mean, sure, the first film set up a mystery, and I was curious about why Richard and Mary Parker abandoned Peter. But this film tries to emphasize the importance of Peter Parker's parents when that was never the case in the comics. The opening scene shows his parents leaving him with Uncle Ben and Aunt May from their perspective, which I think is very interesting, but the plane scene that follows is really dumb. Richard is obsessed with uploading a file, and a guy tries to kill him. He's really focused on uploading that file on the plane, which really boggles me. Like, if this file is so important to you, you could have uploaded it prior to the plane ride. He then presumably dies in the plane crash along with Mary. If this film got rid of the Oscorp scene at the start and the scene where he leaves Peter, one would not be able to tell if this was a Spider-Man film. The plane scene feels like something from a generic action flick. It's really odd how Sony thought it'd be a good idea to start a Spider-Man film without the title character. The parents' story really drags this movie. The parents' story is really distracting. I really hate the Philip Phillips song montage of Peter putting a weird collage on his wall. He looks like he's obsessed with Pepe Sylvia. The train lab scene is dumb as well, especially since it's revealed that Peter's dad created the spider with his DNA. So Peter is destined to be Spider-Man, rather than it being random and by chance. And don't get me started about the deleted scene where Peter's dad shows up and reveals to him that he was alive the whole time. Don't get me started.
You're not my father.
I am your father, Peter. I want you just to listen.
My father's dead.
Peter, listen to me.
He's dead. Who are you?
Why are you bashing this movie, ShadeX? Is it anything you like?
I don't hate this movie, I just wanted to get the parents plot out of the way.
What are your opinions on the Spider-Man costume for this film?
It's great, it's a really good suit. I really love how it looks. Speaking of other things I love, I really like the sequence after the plane scene. Spider-Man's swinging scene at the start of the film is amazing, no pun intended. This should have been the opening scene in the original cut. In this scene, Spider-Man stops Russian mobsters from stealing plutonium. This includes Alexei, who becomes a Rhino at the end of the film. Max Dillon, aka Electro, is introduced at the start as well, and he is played by Jamie Foxx, a well-known black actor. Spider-Man meets him at the beginning of the film. He drops a ton of the blueprints for an electric grid he created. Spidey saves him, hands him back his blueprints, and calls him his eyes and ears. This leads to Max being obsessed with Spider-Man to an unhealthy level later in the film. Anyway, Peter ends up missing out on Gwen Stacy's graduation speech, but he ends up showing up in time to kiss her and take his diploma. While on the way to the graduation ceremony, Stan Lee spots Peter still wearing the Spider-Man mask, and says that he knows the guy. I still miss Stan Lee so much. I really like the graduation scene a lot. The best part about it has gotta be the moment where Flash Thompson meets up with Peter. He hugs him. This is a great moment in a flawed film. Alright, so this was a deleted scene, but it really should have been in the movie. Just want to give props to Chris Zilka, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, for playing Peter's iconic rival. I really like this version of Flash, and this is the last time the audience sees him. I really like how he was handled in these two films. He isn't simply a dumb jock like the one in the first Raimi film. I still like that version of Flash, especially this line.
I don't want to fight you, Flash.
I wouldn't want to fight me neither.
However, I think TASM Flash is the best live-action adaptation of the character in my opinion, and I really wish audience got to see more of him. It's a shame he won't be playing Agent Venom. While at the graduation ceremony, Peter is hanging out with Gwen. However, Peter sees the ghost of Captain George Stacy. He sees visions of him multiple times throughout the film. I'll be talking about Gwen and Peter's relationship later, but for now we'll cover another thing I love, that being the montage of Spider-Man being a hero of the city of New York. It's a really great scene. From this montage, I can tell that he is beloved by the city and viewed as a hero who gives people hope. In that montage, Spidey meets up with a kid named Jorge, who he says is from some bullies, who he then walks home. Jorge will be important later. Another thing I want to mention is that Peter works for the Daily Bugle and J. Jonah Jameson is mentioned in the film. Sadly, we never see him and Peter's only interaction with him on screen is in an email.
Sony is a menace for mentioning me off screen and not showing me in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's a travesty, I say, travesty.
That's another thing I don't like about this film. Thankfully, he wasn't far from home. Back on the topic of Max Dillon, he has the job of being an electrician for Oscorp, and he is berated by his boss, Mr. Smythe. Nobody cares about him, and Spider-Man is the only person who treated him with respect. Anyway, he falls into a tank of electric eels, and then he gains powers. It's really stupid.
You don't like electric eels? But that was a major part of my tragic origin story.
No, I'm not totally against it. Electro had to get his powers somehow. I just find it really silly. Anyway, Max breaks out of a cocoon that was formed on his body after being shocked by eels, becomes Electro, and he just wanders around the city.
What are your opinions on my beautifully blue character design?
I think Electro looks pretty goofy, but the design isn't as awful as people say. At least in my opinion. Soon Max gets filmed and sees himself at Times Square. The thing Max Dillon wants the most is to be seen as a somebody, and with all the eyes on him, it excites him. At first, Max doesn't want to hurt anybody, and even Spider-Man notices this. However, a sniper shoots Max, which leads to him hating Spider-Man. One thing that is interesting is that afterwards, the camera focuses on Spider-Man instead of Max, who is now getting more attention than him. Max is of course bothered by the fact that he believes the wall crawler betrayed him. We also get a cool slow scene where Spider-Man uses his spider sense. And get this infamous line.
Now it's time for me to light my candle!
Spider-Man seems to have defeated Electro, however, he falls into a building and harvests power from it, which turns off all the lights in Times Square. He gets a ton of energy and begins shooting lightning at everyone. However, Spidey shoots him with a fireman's hose before he does any more damage. After this, Max ends up in Ravencroft, where Dr. Kafka has trapped him in a contraption. It is there that Max takes the name Electro and vows to take revenge on Spider-Man. I've already talked a bit about Electro, so now I'll talk about the Green Goblin. One would expect that Norman Osborn would be introduced as the Green Goblin first. I mean, he was talked about in the first movie after all, which was something I didn't remember until rewatching it for this video. Instead, Harry Osborn is first introduced. He visits his father, who is about to die, but before he dies, Norman basically says this.
Hey son, I'm glad you're here with me now, but guess what? I have goblin AIDS and I'm gonna die, and it's genetic, so that's your problem now. Here's the USB drive.
Then he dies.
Damn, my dad died. Now it's time for me to go collect Spider-Man's blood, because plot convenience, I guess.
This film focuses on Harry trying to treat his disease that he fears may end his life. He has a reunion with Peter where they talk about old times and how they missed each other. Peter tells him that he's in a complicated relationship with Gwen. Later in the film, Harry, desperate for a cure, asks him if he can get Spider-Man's blood, because he believes it can cure him, because Richard Parker was developing a spider formula that would be able to let humans self-heal. Peter is unsure if this will heal Harry, and Gwen agrees that it might hurt him. Peter eventually shows up at Harry's house as Spider-Man, and warns Harry that their blood might not be compatible. Harry offers Spidey money, but he refuses to accept it. We then get this badly delivered line.
You're a fraud, Spider-Man!
His story in this film is very interesting. He becomes the CEO of Oscorp, but eventually he gets ousted from the company. A girl named Felicia is also in the film, who he chooses to be his second in command. I assume she's supposed to be the Black Cat, but she doesn't do anything in this film. With Harry being ousted with the excuse he covered up Max's injury, he breaks into Ravencroft and hopes to join forces with him. This scene is interesting because Harry manages to get Electro on his side by telling him he needs him. This is what Electro always wanted, to be needed. Harry and Electro team up and capture the guy who tried to boot him out of the company. Electro goes into the grid. He can turn into electricity now, which I think is really cool. Harry then takes a spider venom, thinking it will cure him, but his body reacts poorly to it. Then the Oscorp boardroom guy goes into an elevator, never to be seen again. Harry then gets into the goblin suit. You'd think Harry would kill the guy who tried to kick him out of Oscorp, but he doesn't. At least not in the theatrical cut, as there is a deleted scene where he does just that. Anyway, this film is trash. I really don't like Harry Osborn as the Goblin. He looks like a crackhead. There's nothing else good about this movie.
What about the chemistry between Peter and Gwen Stacy? Also, wasn't the web hand great?
Alright, I'm exaggerating. This film isn't awful. Peter and Gwen's chemistry is alright. It's decent. I find the back and forth, on again, off again plot interesting. Peter is haunted by visions of Captain George Stacy throughout the film, which are unintentionally funny. Throughout the film, though, I was dreading for Gwen's death. She has a bright future ahead of her, with her being accepted into Oxford in the UK. But this film is also an adaptation of the death of Gwen Stacy, so she dies. The film has a fun final fight scene where Electro uses his electric dubstep powers to fight him. Gwen Stacy turns off the grid, and Spidey overpowers Electro with electricity that makes him explode. The day seems to be saved, but then Goblin Harry shows up and kills Gwen because Peter wouldn't give him his blood. As far as the web hand scene goes, it's really stupid. It's unintentionally funny. Harry's turn to the dark side makes no sense. His motivations are dumb.
Hey, my motivations are dumb, ShadeX. I just want Spider-Man's blood so I can get rid of my blood AIDS, or goblin AIDS, or whatever the fuck they're called.
Anyway, the film ends up with Harry and the mysterious guy in the hat named Mr. Fears deciding to form a team, which would have been the Sinister Six. He gets Rhino to attack the city and Peter quits being Spider-Man because Gwen died. However, after listening to Gwen's speech, he gets motivated to take up the mantle again. Jorge, dressed in a Spider-Man costume, shows up and attempts to take on the Rhino by himself. Peter saves him and calls him brave. I really love this scene as it mirrors the scene of him saving the kid in the car in the first film. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is a hero to kids, and that's the best aspect of his character. Spidey is about to fight the Rhino, but then the film ends. In conclusion, this film is bad at times, and I'll admit that, but to me this film feels like a Saturday morning cartoon. Saturday morning cartoons made with the goal of selling toys. However, rather than being made to sell toys, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was made to set up a cinematic universe. The film tried to rush to the finish line and set up the Sinister Six. This is why 3 Spider-Man villains were introduced. They wanted to do the Sinister Six, it's teased in the credits. I think that had the film just had Electro or Green Goblin, it would have been a better movie. I don't absolutely hate this film. Even with the parent subplot, some good comes out of it. That being a heartwarming scene where Aunt May tells Peter she's his true parent. Anyway, overall, this film is a mess, but I enjoy parts of it.
What are your opinions on the Ever Covenant, Amazing Spider-Man 2, Electro's Collector Edition case? Everybody wants it, I know you do.
It's really goofy looking, I am tempted to buy it, but I don't think I will.
Stay with me, stay with me. Stay with me, stay with me. You stay with me. Yeah, thanks for stepping up for me. You're the bravest kid I've ever seen. I'm gonna take care of this chick. You go take care of your mom, okay? Alright, get out of here, go.
So what's my final opinion on both TASM films? They aren't the worst films in the world. Andrew Garfield was a great Spider-Man, but the problem was he was given bad scripts. There were so many spin-offs that were planned. However, the Amazing Spider-Man cinematic universe never materialized, aside from the first 2 films. The parents' plot wasn't enough to keep people's interest. These films tried to be like the Christopher Nolan Batman films in a way because they had a darker tone and put emphasis on the fact Spider-Man had dead parents. But here's the problem. Spider-Man isn't Batman. Sure, his Uncle Ben died and that had an effect on him. He lost someone just like Bruce Wayne. However, Spidey's parents aren't as important as Batman's. The Amazing Spider-Man universe was gonna have the Sinister Six, and Norman Osborn's frozen head was gonna play a role for some reason. Also, according to Dennis Leary, Spider-Man would have brought back his character, Captain George Stacy, back to life with a potion. Thankfully, those weird plans didn't become a reality. Andrew Garfield didn't show up for an event where Amazing Spider-Man 3 was going to be announced because he was sick. Then the Sony hack by North Korea happened and tons of emails leaked, and quite a few of them were about Spider-Man. Kevin Feige gave notes to Amy Pascal on The Amazing Spider-Man 2 that addressed problems with the film. She didn't listen to his input, which is really clear. Sony also was aware that they really mishandled the franchise with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they became desperate. The emails mentioned they wanted Raimi back for a 4th Spider-Man film, and even planned a crossover with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. Anyway, what happened next?
Reboot!
Spider-Man was introduced into the MCU in Captain America Civil War. Then his first solo film, Homecoming, came out in 2017, the year The Amazing Spider-Man 3 was supposed to come out. How are the MCU Spidey films? Decent, but I'll talk about them in the future once the first trilogy finishes. Let's just say I have mixed feelings on the first two films. Speaking of the third MCU film, Andrew Garfield might be back for it. Tobey Maguire might be back too. While this isn't 100% confirmed, I am hoping it is. If true, No Way Home will be one of the most ambitious Spidey flicks of all time. Anyway, the Amazing Spider-Man films, while not completely true to their titles, are okay. TASM 1 is underrated in my opinion, while TASM 2 is the worst Spider-Man film, but I still enjoy it. These films are flawed, but they could have been amazing. Had Sony not tried to rush to the finish line and attempted to create a cinematic universe, we could have got a great adaptation. I really want to see the Sinister Six in live action. Andrew Garfield is a great Spider-Man. I love how he jokes around. He played the role very well. Anyway, the future of Spider-Man seems very bright. I really hope that Tobey and Andrew get to be on screen together along with Tom Holland. The first two Spider-Man actors were done dirty by Sony in different ways. However, Andrew Garfield definitely got the shortest end of the stick in my opinion. Overall, the two TASM films were an interesting test for Sony to see if Spider-Man could compete with the MCU. They failed, and I definitely understand why. Anyway, this video was months in the making. I hope you all enjoyed it. A ton of people helped with this video. I'd love to thank Manuel D for giving me the idea for this project, looking over my script, and editing 2 AMVs for this video. I'd like to thank GirlyWolfPup for editing her short segment for this review. I am glad you reached out to me to be a part of it, since you helped motivate me to get this video done. I'd like to thank Large Black Male, Andrew IG, Ramen, and Manuel for recording voice lines for the video. Also, special thanks to Dylan Doodle for making the thumbnail. And finally, I want to thank Nokkorone again for drawing my new stills. I paid him in Steam games for these stills, and I love how they turned out. With all that being said, this has been ShadeX, and I hope you all feel nothing but good vibes.